Welcome back, everyone. With A Tale of Two Cities incoming, I'd like to take a few minutes to get us all on the same page. I find that for many of us, the idea of reading a novel is actually a little confusing and maybe even outright misleading. Now, how could that be? Well, first, for more than a few, the idea of reading for enjoyment might seem a little alien. And so sitting down to experience a good novel and actually finding it entertaining can seem crazy on the face of it. For others of a more practical bent, a novel can seem somewhat pointless. These are the kinds of people who love reading nonfiction and philosophy connected to the real world. After all, if it's a novel, we know that nothing in it can actually be real. Nothing in it could have happened. So, what am I supposed to get out of someone else's imagination? Just their opinion? And then there are others still who like reading in fiction just fine, but the idea of a novel like this being old can put them off. Why would I want to read something this old where everyone connected to it is dead? They might ask. And more still will get nervous when they approach a great historical novel like this one, because if you've heard of it before, it's likely been in the context of school, where it's presented to you as something almost mythical, or worse, an assignment that you have inflicted upon you and you would never read of your own accord. Let's spend some time addressing those questions and others. In short, I'd like to help you understand how and why you should enjoy a novel, especially a novel like A Tale of Two Cities. And take heart. It helps to remember that no one, not even Charles Dickens, was born a classic. Novels like this became great because many people read them and loved them over the years. And it's to be hoped that you will too. A wise man once said, "Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime." In the first case, you might be a nice person and the individual you give the fish to will feel full for a while, but only a short while. Further, if that person depends on you for his or her fish, then all you're really doing is furthering their dependence on someone else. How much better is it to equip that person with the knowledge of how to fish, how to provide for themselves? If you do that, they don't need you anymore and they can move forward. That's the approach we're taking today. I'd like to take a step back and explain something to you that no one I can recall ever actually explained to me at this point in my life, well, the point where you are, how and why we should read novels. So, what makes reading a novel different and important from any other kind of reading? That's the central question we'll be wrestling with today. First, let's get clear of a related topic, this idea of reading old books. Why should we read them at all? After all, shouldn't we just skip on up to something more recent and up to date? If it's more modern, doesn't that mean it's better and it's surpassed the old stuff? Well, in some cases, we have to grant that that is true. I would much rather go to a doctor who is reading 2023 books and not ones from 1723. But what makes that a good idea? Is the information in those books better just because it's newer? Certainly not. In fact, new information can just as easily be incorrect, wrong, and even evil as something that is old. There was a time when cutting-edge science thought that shoving flowers in your face protected you against the plague. Was it true just because it was then new? In 1861, Alexander Stephens of Georgia proposed that the newly minted Confederate States of America would be remembered as one of the greatest moments in human history because of its radical and new idea that government should be founded on the quote-unquote truth that the white man was always better than the black man. Adolf Hitler was also very proud of his cutting-edge philosophy that declared the superiority of Germany and the extermination of all things Jewish. At the time each of those statements were made, they were all very new. So, should we have agreed with it then? Certainly not. In fact, may God forbid it. And why not? For the simple reason that new ideas are just like old ideas. Some are true and some are false. Human nature and human failings have remained the same throughout history, And while newer people might have access to different information, the people writing today are just as likely to be wrong about things as the ones who were writing 100 or even 1,000 years ago. In fact, they are often better at lying and deception. There is nothing automatically better about new thoughts when compared to old. On the other hand, there are some definite reasons to look at what previous peoples and generations had to say about things. For one, they provide us with a truly outside perspective. These are people who are thinking about things that aren't bound up in our modern controversies and movements. They have their own versions of that, but often we understand what those were and we can account for them. Further, with the benefit of hindsight, we can see how their own ideas worked out. It's like having input from some of the greatest minds in all of human history in hopefully a proper context. And let's be honest, at least here in the West, how well have all these new ideas worked out for us? It might be best to learn from those who successfully built our civilization rather than those who are destroying it. Anyway, back to fiction in general and novels in particular. One of the most important things to realize about a novel is that every good novel has at least one coherent point to get across. It may simply be to evoke certain images or emotions from the reader. It might be to communicate some profound truth. Ironically, some authors write their novels to communicate the point that they have no point, which is a point in and of itself. But a novel doesn't simply inform you of its points. It makes you experience them and feel them in a profound way. You live the idea or themes that the author is presenting. And that's one of the things that makes fiction so powerful. If I call you into a room and tell you I'm going to give you a lecture about life, the universe, and everything, you're going to have your intellectual guard up and you're going to carefully consider each major point in particular. For more than a few people, if it isn't interesting or fun, you won't even listen to me at all. On the other hand, if I wrap all those points, on purpose or not, into an engaging story and get you to read it because you enjoy it, you're very likely to simply absorb it all without deep evaluation and, better from my perspective, you'll have positive emotions and experiences associated with the expression of those ideas. Make no mistake, novels, not to mention fiction in general, are extremely powerful. In fact, a significant part of your worldview has probably already been molded by people telling you stories. The genius is that you never even realized it was happening. Would you like to know why evangelical Christians lost the famous culture war of the late 1900s and early 2000s? Why America has been transformed the way it has? It wasn't because they didn't get people elected or spend enough money. It was because they lost the most important field of the battle, the imagination. Once they lost that, they couldn't undo the damage to society. I don't say all this to imply that you should be afraid of novels or see them as part of some grand, crazy conspiracy. I say it because I want you to take them seriously. Reading the right novel at the right time can literally be life-shaping or life-shattering. They can build you up or tear you to pieces. So handle them with care, look forward to them with excitement, and appreciate their power. The first step to actually enjoying a novel, and you really do need to try to enjoy it because otherwise you might as well simply look at it as a list of facts, is that you need to be able to understand it. You need to be able to connect with the author, the culture, and the story. If you don't, you'll miss out on most of what it has to offer. That connection is what makes a novel truly an experience. Without that, there is actually no point to reading it and you're better off doing something else. Even staring in a mirror or staring at a wall is about the same effect. To really get the most out of it, you need to be intentional and active in the text. First, you need to really see the novel in its proper context. Who wrote it? When was it written? And to what purpose? How does our modern understanding of things differ from theirs? Next, you need to track the specifics of the story. What characters are involved? What are their motivations and how do they all connect together? Finally, you need to keep a lookout for intentional techniques and devices that authors use to quietly insert further levels of meaning into their stories. When you pick up on these clues and you start to put them together, you can lay back layers of mystery and meaning that can leave you impressed and awed. It's useful to note that this doesn't mean you have to devote hours and hours of research into becoming an expert on the book before you pick it up. That said, you do again need to make an effort. You don't have to be an NFL level athlete to enjoy a sport like football, but I guarantee you'll get much more out of it if you get off the couch now and again and practice with your team. The same is true of any sport you like: volleyball, golf, baseball, softball, you name it. Similarly, if you don't do something about your ignorance of the bigger picture of the book you're about to read, it's almost always worth your time to spend a few minutes on it. For example, if you don't know anything about the French Revolution or the Reign of Terror, you'll get much, much more out of A Tale of Two Cities or The Scarlet Pimpernel if you just read an encyclopedia entry or watch a short YouTube history before you get started. So let's take a look at all of these areas and issues, particularly as applied to A Tale of Two Cities. The first important area to take into account is context. What is going on around the book and around the author? For that, you'll need to think about the following questions. The logical place to begin is with who wrote it. Novels don't just appear out of thin air. They're intelligently and intentionally composed by specific people. You can leave aside the complete nonsense about the death of the author and the like. We read books for the meaning and experiences that the authors put into them. If you don't know the first thing about the author, you're very likely to miss the most important messages and themes and points that the book has to offer. Once you know something about the author, you need to ask, when and why did he or she write this book? Most authors will tell you that stories aren't random. They spring up in response to specific experiences and events and inspiration. Sometimes the author is trying to convey a feeling, maybe how they felt during a time in their life. Maybe they're working through a trauma or reliving something positive. Sometimes it's in response to political or social problems, and they're trying to influence your opinion. Uncle Tom's Cabin is a great example of this one. Other times, they just have a great world or character or story they want to share with you. Still other times, they simply need money, and churning out another novel is a way to pay the bills. It can be a combination of all of the above or something else entirely. You won't know until you look. But hopefully you can see how knowing that a story was inspired for one reason and not another can help you get much more out of it. Finally, what is going on around the author? The historical context plays directly into the author's experience, and what makes it into the novel is very important. Sometimes this is intentional, like we'll see here with Dickens. Dickens pulled directly from his own life and people he knew in order to model many of his characters in this book and others. In the case of Tale of Two Cities, Dickens was actually initially inspired to write the book after acting in a play in which his character, well, I won't give that away just yet. Let's just say that something his character did was central to the novel that he would eventually write. Further, Dickens had also read a book called The French Revolution by Scottish historian Thomas Carlyle. Another very important aspect of Dickens' context was at the time, in the absence of any screens to occupy the people's time, performance reading was a significant pastime. Not only did people read more in general, they would pay money to hear authors essentially perform their works live. Dickens loved this way of presenting his books, and he often wrote them with performing them out loud specifically in mind. In fact, his refusal to stop performing contributed to his death in the end because it put so much stress on his system. Why is this important? What did we just learn? Well, if you're having trouble with A Tale of Two Cities, remember that it was intended to be read aloud. Do listen to a good audiobook, or even read it to yourself out loud. It can make all the difference in the world. The difference between really enjoying it and missing the point entirely, maybe. And we found it out by taking the time to look into the context. Next, don't go into a novel, especially a very long one, expecting to simply wing your way through it without support. Good novels have many threads of meaning and characters, and the very best can be positively convoluted. Every page may have some new wrinkle or angle that you missed before. In fact, when you finally pick up on the significance of a theme, idea, or person, you may go back and see that it's been there all the time, suddenly hiding in plain sight, and you simply missed it. That makes you reread the whole thing, enjoying it again in an entirely new light. Because of that, it's best to find some way to help you keep track of the major plot points and characters. That way, when someone or some person or some idea suddenly pops up again, you can check on them and be reminded of who they are and why they've been significant. There are many variations and sundry ways to do this, from jotting it down in a notebook you keep with your book, to making notes inside the margins, or writing on the back cover. In the end, the method for you will be the one that works best with the greatest combination of accuracy and effort. The key is to do it and stay dedicated to it throughout the process. As you progress, especially with books and novels whose language you aren't used to, don't be afraid to reach out for help. And yes, this can mean chapter summaries, Sparks notes, Cliff's notes, Norm's notes, and other reader's guides. I think that many times we view these things in a bad light and almost consider them cheating. Well, it can be cheating, but only if you use them to replace your reading instead of supporting it. They are designed, in theory, to supplement and deepen your knowledge of a text, not replace it. If you use them correctly, by all means, please do use them. So if you finish a chapter and you aren't really sure that you got it at all, take a moment and look up a summary of that chapter and make sure you're on the right path. If you aren't certain about a character, look them up in a summary list. Do be forewarned, though, every time you crack open one of these guides, you have a chance for spoilers, which can significantly ruin your experience of a book, even if you get the knowledge that you needed right. If you don't want to risk the spoilers, as we said, you can create your own tracking system as you go along and keep it handy. Another great way to do this is the bookmark trick. Get a broad strip of paper for your bookmark and keep notes on characters and plot points there. Then when you're done, it can stay with the book and it can tell its own story for next time. It's always interesting to get a used book other people have been through, pick it up, and see what they've done with their experience. And of course, as we mentioned, do feel free to listen to the book. It can significantly enhance your experience. You can also listen and read at the same time, as long as your edition matches the audio version, of course. Just use your imagination and find what works for you. As you read, you'll also want to keep a specific eye out for literary devices and conventions. These are methods and techniques that authors know well, and they use them to add new and deeper layers of meaning to their texts. Think of them like a step above Easter eggs in a game or movie. If you have the right knowledge and you're on the lookout for them, you can unlock all kinds of crazy references and content. Gifted authors can use these devices to introduce subtle nuances that make their books much, much more than just a shallow surface-level story. The very best of these books are essentially works of art. For our purposes, these literary conventions can be divided into two main categories: literary elements and literary devices. Elements are what you might call big picture tools that can affect large portions of an entire work. You might also think of them as strategic in nature. Devices, on the other hand, generally affect specific words or phrases or scenes as opposed to great swaths of the work. You might call these tactical. If you're not familiar with those terms, strategy is how you go about winning a war. Tactics is what you do to win a specific fight on a specific battlefield. In a similar way, literary elements are themes woven throughout the entire novel, or at least large portions of it, while literary devices are often used to affect specific places and points in the novel. There is so much to unpack here that we won't be able to get too far. But if you walk away from this talk with a greater appreciation for both elements and devices, and you are more on the lookout for them hereafter, I think we'll have accomplished our mission. These are some of the various elements of novels. First, you have the plot, which is usually divided into an expected format and process. Just like with your informational essays, structure itself is very important, and its order and expectation play a massive role in communicating clearly and powerfully to any audience. The 5 traditional plot elements are: number 1, introduction or exposition. This is where you are introduced to the basic characters and given an idea of the central conflict. It's also the author's chance to quote-unquote hook you and get you involved. This is the all-important point where the author not only equips you with the basic points you need in order to proceed, but he or she gives you a reason to want to read farther. Number 2, rising action. In this section, the tension and stakes are raised, sometimes gradually, sometimes in fits and starts. The conflict grows and the pressure is added on you and the characters. It looks like things might not end the way we want them to, and we feel that. Number 3, climax. At the climax, everything comes to a head. This is the emotional breaking point of the novel, and the equivalent of the hardest part of a workout. Just when you think you can't take it anymore, the conflict is solved somehow, preferably in a dramatic and unpredictable style. Number 4, falling action. After the climax, we need a break. Things slow down and are lowered from the previous level of intensity. This reduction of stress often takes place more quickly than the rising action, because already the story often feels as if it's essentially over, and to drag it out further would seem pointless. And finally, number 5, resolution. At the very end, most novels offer you a sense of completion. The wrong has been righted, and it leaves you with a positive sense of fulfillment. Much of the nostalgia you have from the novel is created during this phase because it makes you feel good and complete. Now note that this applies to just about all good storytelling. You'll notice probably that you see it in the next movie you watch. Also, remember that there is no law that requires all of these elements to be in any one particular book. Often, authors will play with them in order to get desired effects, but even there, if you understand what's happening, you can appreciate it more. For example, if an author wants to leave you feeling deeply unsettled and affected by the experience, he or she can alter the falling action and resolution to make them feel rushed and incomplete. Or maybe they just leave off the resolution entirely so you feel like you're left hanging. Here are some other literary elements to be aware of. In fact, if you make your bookmark or notepad, you may want to specifically search out all these elements and write a brief description of each of them in it. The setting. Where does the novel take place? What do things physically look like, feel like, smell like? Can you see them and experience it all in your head? The mood. Often controlled and set by the setting, the mood is how the novel makes you feel emotionally as you read. Is it very dark? Is it happy and light? Does it inspire you? Does it make you angry? These are all emotions that the author is attempting to manipulate in you, and it helps to be aware of what's happening. The protagonist. This is the hero of the novel, the person or persons who are trying to accomplish the good side of the conflict. Most often, this is the central character of the novel and the person you are supposed to care the most about. Note that the author's definition of good might be very different from yours, so don't jump to conclusions based on your preferences. The antagonist. This is the bad guy, the force or forces working against the protagonist and thereby creating the conflict in the novel. The conflict. What is everyone fighting about? What is the issue they're trying to solve? What am I worried is going to happen, and which side am I rooting for? The conflict drives the whole novel and the plot process, so understanding it is essential. The narrator and the method. Who is telling this story, and how is it being told? Is it inside the head of the main character, or is there someone describing it all to you? Does this narrator know everything that can be known in the novel's world, or is it just from one perspective? Understanding that can change everything about how you experience the novel. And then finally, the theme. What is the novel all about? What is the central walkaway experience, knowledge, or understanding that you're supposed to leave the book with? What's the point? Now, note that there are often sub-themes that contribute to the central theme. But in the end, there is always one, even if someone is trying to make a point about there being no point, and clearly, understanding this theme makes the whole experience come together. Do note that often the theme won't be clear until the very end of the novel, when everything you've experienced can be taken into account. So don't rush it, and don't jump to conclusions. Sometimes a sneaky author will use that against you by leading you to think one thing while they set you up for a dramatic reversal. Also, be careful about looking the theme up before you finish the novel. Knowing the theme is virtually guaranteed to come with a whole raft of spoilers. Turning to literary techniques, as we said, these are specific uses of specific words in specific ways to get, yes, specific results. Just like a painter might mix colors in a certain way to produce a dark atmosphere or a glowing one in their painting, great authors will use these techniques to create incredible themes and experiences and motifs that contribute to their elements. Some of these you may already be aware of. Imagery. While we normally think of reading as having nothing to do with sight, the best authors create very vivid images in our minds. You can see them very, very clearly and meaningfully when they get it right. Far better than you ever could see it in a movie or a game. For example, J.K. Rowling's imagery in creating Hogwarts has resulted in a school that literally millions of people would almost kill to attend. She did that by making you feel Hogwarts and experience it. Using good imagery makes ideas literally come to life in your head, and the very best involve all five senses. Simile and metaphor are very similar. They communicate ideas and experiences to you by comparing some new idea or experience that you haven't encountered before to something that you know well. A simile does this by using like or as, while a metaphor just ties the two directly together without either of those words. So to continue the Potter examples, you might say that the Norwegian ridgeback soared over Harry like an eagle for a simile, and that fire erupted from Hermione's wand. Is the dragon really an eagle, or is the wand really on fire? Well, Hermione hopes not. No, but you know eagles and you know flames. So when you hear those words, you can paint a picture in your mind of what the author wants you to see. Hyperbole is an overstatement. It is intentionally about blowing things out of all reasonable proportion so that you get a feeling for how really big something is. For example, "I'm so hungry I could eat a whole hippogriff," Ron complained as he trudged out of the dark forest. Now, is Ron literally going to be eating a horse-sized monster? Of course not. But by saying he is, the author is making the point that he's really hungry. Allegory is a lot like simile and metaphor, but you're taking the connection a step farther. These two things aren't just like each other, they really are each other. At least that's what is implied. For example, in Harry Potter, Voldemort and his Death Eaters are really allegories for Hitler and the Nazis. Much of their ideology is lifted straight from the one and imported directly into another, all to make a point. Irony is seeing one thing and saying the opposite, again as a way of really emphasizing what you're seeing and how stark it is. For example, if on a cold, gray day you were to say, "Wow, isn't it warm and beautiful?" you would be making an ironic statement that really emphasizes how dull a day it is by reminding everyone of light and warmth and how it's missing. I'll drop the Harry Potter references here for a moment, rather than give away some plot points if anyone hasn't read it. Motif is linked to theme, but they aren't the same. A motif is a recurring idea or image that points you to the theme and deepens your knowledge of that theme. Often, a specific motif will give you just a little more than the last one. Done well, motifs paint the picture of the theme in your mind, like an artist painting one brushstroke at a time. Each stroke by itself can seem meaningless, but by the time they're all assembled into one image, you realize you have a beautiful picture. A symbol is exactly what it sounds like. It's a thing that represents something else symbolically. It can happen anywhere and at any time in a novel, and they can be very easy to miss. In fact, some people almost make up symbols that the author doesn't intend. Well, not almost, they do. Understood properly, though, symbols play an important role in building motifs, which in turn create the central theme. You might think of symbols as the paint that the author or artist uses to create their motifs, and the motifs in turn create the beauty. To finish out our Harry Potter examples, Harry's Patronus is a stag, which reminds him of his father. That is one instance of a recurring motif in the books, with Harry wrestling with the idea of parenthood. His own parents are gone, and he has terrible experiences with the Dursleys as stand-in parents. He later meets good examples of what a parent should be, from Professor McGonagall to the Weasleys to Sirius Black to Remus Lupin and Tonks. In the last scene of the book, Harry and Ginny have developed into the positive parents that Harry never had. Each of these instances, including the stag Patronus, is a single motif created by using specific symbols, and the result is a beautiful picture of parenthood done right in the end. Now let's apply it. In preparation for Tale of Two Cities, let's take a look at an example that you're about to see. Remember, symbols are used to create motifs, and motifs are then used to create coherent themes you can see running throughout the work that give it greater meaning. I'll not try to give away too much in the story in the hopes that you can still experience it directly. So here we'll be looking at a sub-theme that really sets up the main theme of the whole book. That way you can discover that main theme on your own. First, in one of the opening scenes, you'll encounter a moment when an accident in a dirty French street resulted in gallons and gallons of red wine being spilled in the midst of a crowd. Hundreds of people scramble to lap it up by any means necessary, even sucking it out of the muddy, dirty gutters. They do this because of their poverty and desperation, and no matter the fact that they are demeaning themselves, they greedily crawl all over each other to get at it. Well, the red wine is a symbol for the many gallons of red blood that these same people will needlessly spill as they try to work out their anger and poverty by murdering thousands of people, often very brutally, in the Revolution and the Terror. This, of course, ties into a significant motif that you see repeated throughout the work: blood and murder. The French Revolution and the terror that followed it was full of it, and every time you see it in the book, it's usually packed with symbols, and it points to one of the major themes of the book. And that theme is death, debasement, and dehumanization. Dickens goes out of his way to show that, especially in France, these themes aren't limited to one social class or another. The elites are just as awful as the peasants, but you definitely walk away feeling a disgust for the callous disregard for life on all sides, exactly as Dickens intended you to do. And that sets up the even bigger theme that, hopefully, will hit you hard in the climax, and I think you'll find it worth the wait. As we close, just some good advice from other teachers in this class before on how to enjoy a good novel. The long and short of it is, get engaged, live the novel, and experience it in your head. To that end, actively imagine the story in your mind, engage and see the setting, meet the characters, establish the mood, feel it, put yourself there with your five senses, if at all possible. Make that novel your world while you're sitting there. Question the plot and engage with the author. Ask, what might this person be thinking? How might the weather impact the scene? Why did he or she just say that? All of that helps. If you struggle staying focused with reading or comprehension, try reading in smaller increments. But make sure you actually read everything. Like your life, novels can't be skimmed and skipped to the end. You have to live them. Even if it's just 5 pages a day, do what it takes to read it. Next, try to predict the outcome. Do you think you can outsmart the author? Do you think you can solve the puzzle of how this all ends? Often, simply asking that is enough to keep you engaged in the book. Then finally, talk out loud to yourself as you read, if that's your thing. Remember, this is a conversation between you, the author, and yourself. The more you make it into a conversation, the less it will feel like you're being preached at or having some dead facts forced upon you. Let's let Flannery O'Connor have the final say, in my best or worst Middle Georgia accent. I prefer to talk about the meaning in a story rather than the theme of a story. People talk about the theme of a story as if the theme were like the string that a sack of chicken feed is tied with. They think that if you can pick out the theme the way you pick the right thread in the chicken feed sack, you can rip the story open and feed the chickens. But this is not the way meaning works in fiction. When you can state the theme of a story, when you can separate it from the story itself, then you can be sure the story is not a very good one. The meaning of a story has to be embodied in it. A story is a way to say something that can't be said any other way, and it takes every word in the story to say what the meaning is. You tell a story because a statement would be inadequate. When anybody asks what a story is about, the only proper thing to tell him is to read the story. The meaning of fiction is not abstract meaning, but experienced meaning. And the purpose of making statements about the meaning of a story is only to help you experience the meaning more fully.